Charles Reed was folding his wife's hospital scrubs when the doorbell rang. 42 years of marriage, and he still did her laundry every Friday night. The radiator hissed in the corner. The evening news murmured something about a cold front coming through. He set down the warm fabric and walked to the door, expecting maybe a package or the neighbor kid selling raffle tickets. Linda stood on the porch with a man Charles didn't know. Tall guy, maybe 45, expensive winter coat that looked like it cost more than Charles's truck payment. "This is Marcus Webb," Linda said, her voice half a note too high. "Just a colleague. His car won't start in this cold." Charles invited them in because that's what you do. Made coffee, watched Marcus's hand brush Linda's shoulder as he passed, watched Linda's laugh come out wrong. After Marcus left, Charles asked the only question that mattered. How long? Linda didn't deny it. Linda sat down on the couch, wouldn't look at him, just stared at her hands in her lap like they belonged to somebody else. "Since last summer," she said. 6 months. Charles did the math in his head. Last summer, that was 2 months before his father died. 2 months before Eugene Reed had his stroke in the hospital he'd built with borrowed money in a dream. Charles had been at his father's bedside when the old man finally let go, and Linda had been, where? With Marcus Webb in some exam room after hours? "You've been half dead since Eugene passed," Linda said, and her voice had an edge to it now, not apologetic, defensive. "Marcus makes me feel alive. Half dead." The words hit like a fist to the gut. 42 years, and that's what she thought of him. Half dead. "Do you love him?" Charles heard himself ask. His voice sounded steady, which surprised him. Inside, everything was shaking loose. "I don't know." Linda finally looked up. "Maybe. I don't know if I love you anymore, Charles. I don't know when I stopped." The radiator hissed. The house settled around them. The evening news was still playing in the other room, somebody talking about weather patterns and snowfall predictions. Normal things. The world kept turning while Charles's fell apart. "You need to leave," he said. "Tonight." Linda's face changed. That wasn't the response she'd expected. "Charles, wait. We need to talk about this. We can't just get out." He stood up, didn't yell it, just said it flat and plain. But Linda didn't leave. She stayed right there on that couch, and after a minute she started crying. Real tears, or performed ones. Charles couldn't tell anymore. "I made a terrible mistake," she said through the tears. "I'll end it, I promise. I'll call him tomorrow and end it completely." Charles wanted to believe her. God help him, he wanted to. 42 years. You don't throw away 42 years over 6 months of stupidity. People made mistakes. People came back from mistakes. "We took vows," Linda said. "Remember, for better or worse." 42 years has to mean something, Charles. It was 2 in the morning before they stopped talking in circles. Charles poured them both whiskey, something he never did, but tonight seemed to call for it. The kitchen fluorescent light was too bright. It made Linda's mascara streaks look harsh and sad. "Give me a chance to make this right," she said. One chance. Charles was so tired he could barely think straight. Tired from the shock. Tired from his father's death 2 months ago. Tired from carrying a grief he'd barely started to process before this new wound opened up. "One chance," he said. "That's it." Linda nodded. She reached across the table like she might take his hand, but he pulled back. She went to the spare bedroom instead. The door clicked shut, and Charles sat alone in that too-bright kitchen until dawn started creeping through the window. Saturday morning, he made coffee out of habit. 2 cups. His hands knew the routine, even when his brain was still catching up. Linda came out of the spare bedroom with red-rimmed eyes, real or performed. He still couldn't tell. "I'm sorry," she said again. "I'll call him today. End it completely." Charles nodded, slid her coffee cup across the counter. "Why Marcus?" he asked. "Why at the hospital Dad built?" Linda wrapped her hands around the mug. "It wasn't about the hospital. It wasn't about you either. It was about me feeling, I don't know, seen, like I mattered. You mattered to me." I know you think that." The coffee tasted like ashes. Charles mentioned he needed to sort through his father's estate papers. Boxes of them, out in the garage, stuff he'd been avoiding since Eugene died. Linda volunteered to help, and Charles agreed because he didn't have the energy to argue. But he noticed her phone on the counter, noticed how it kept buzzing. Notification after notification, screen lighting up, then going dark. Linda didn't check it. Just kept it face down, kept talking about calling Marcus today, ending it today, making things right today. The phone buzzed again. Charles poured his coffee down the sink, stood at the window looking out at the frozen yard. 42 years. You should know someone after 42 years. You should be able to tell when they're lying. But standing there in his kitchen on a Saturday morning in January, Linda's phone buzzing like a patient heartbeat on the counter, Charles realized he didn't know anything at all anymore. Sunday morning, they went to church together. Linda's idea. She wanted to go to First Methodist like always, like nothing had changed. Charles agreed because, hell, he didn't know why. Maybe because Pastor Wilkins was preaching, and Charles needed something larger than himself right now. Needed to believe grace was possible. They drove separately, met in the parking lot, walked in side by side. The congregation noticed. Small towns always notice. Frank Dooley from the hardware store gave Charles that particular look. Half pity, half relief. It wasn't happening to him. The church ladies smiled at Linda with their mouths, but not their eyes. Charles and Linda sat in a pew near the middle. Not their usual front row. Charles couldn't handle that kind of visibility. The wooden bench creaked under his weight. Someone behind them was humming along to the organ prelude. The hymnal pages rustled as people found the opening song. Pastor Wilkins's sermon was about forgiveness. Of course it was. Divine timing or cosmic cruelty, Charles couldn't decide which. During the closing hymn, Linda reached over and took his hand. Her palm was warm and dry, familiar. 42 years of hand-holding. People could see them from every angle. Older couple, weathering some storm, holding on to each other. Charles held her hand back. Wanted desperately for this to mean something real. The next 3 days, Linda cooked. Monday night was pot roast. Charles's favorite, something she hadn't made in months. The smell filled the kitchen. Carrots and potatoes and that rich brown gravy his mother used to make the same way. Remember when we first got married? Linda said, setting plates on the table. I burned everything for 6 months straight. Charles smiled despite himself. That casserole that was still frozen in the middle. You ate it anyway. Didn't want to hurt your feelings. They were trying. That's what Charles told himself. They were trying to remember why they'd chosen each other 42 years ago. But Linda's phone kept buzzing. All through dinner, she'd placed it face down next to her plate, and every few minutes it would light up and vibrate against the wood. Linda didn't check it, just kept cutting her pot roast into smaller and smaller pieces. Work? Charles asked. Probably. I'll check it later. Tuesday night, they watched television together. Some crime show Linda liked. Charles mostly watched her from the corner of his eye. Watched how she angled her body toward the TV, but kept the phone in her lap, thumb moving across the screen when she thought he wasn't looking. The blue light reflected off her face in the dark living room. Wednesday, Linda suggested dinner at the steakhouse Friday night. Like a date, she said. Remember when we used to have date nights? Charles did remember, before Amy was born, before his electrical business took off and required 60-hour weeks, before his father got sick, before life became routine instead of romance. That sounds good, he said. He meant it too. Wanted to believe in date nights and pot roast dinners and second chances. So he went online and booked the lake cabin for late February, the one they used to rent when Amy was little. Thought maybe they could get away for a weekend, reconnect without the daily grind wearing them down. Hey, he said that evening. I booked the lake cabin, last weekend in February, just us. Linda smiled. That sounds perfect. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, glanced at the screen, turned it over quickly, but not quickly enough. Charles saw the name. Marcus. Saw the heart emoji next to it. Linda's smile didn't change. Work can wait, she said. Friday morning, Amy called. Charles's daughter, 28 years old, high school history teacher, lived alone in a rental house across town. Dad, she said, can we meet? Bluebird Diner, noon. Something in her voice. Careful, serious. Everything okay? We need to talk, please. Charles arrived early, ordered coffee that tasted burned, watched through the diner window as Amy pulled up, manila folder under her arm. She looked like she'd been crying, or hadn't slept, or both. She slid into the booth across from him, put the folder on the table, stared at it like it might bite her. Don't open it here, she said. Take it home. But Dad, her voice cracked. I should have told you sooner. I've known for 2 months, and I didn't know what to do, and I'm so sorry. Known what? Amy pushed the folder across the table. Cell phone records, from the family plan. Mom and him. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. Charles drove past his house, past the lake where he'd proposed to Linda 30 years ago. Ended up at the cemetery where his father was buried. Eugene Reed's headstone was still new-looking, fresh granite. The ground hadn't fully settled yet. He sat in his truck with the heater running, finally opened the folder. 214 text messages, just in the last 3 weeks. Timestamps next to each one. 11:47 p.m., 1:23 a.m., 3:15 a.m. Tuesday night, the night she'd made pot roast. 18 texts between 9 p.m. and midnight. Wednesday evening, while she'd suggested the steakhouse date, Marcus had texted, tomorrow night, my place? Thursday, the day Charles booked the lake cabin, Linda had replied to Marcus, he still doesn't know, playing the grieving wife perfectly. Charles's phone rang. Linda, calling to ask where he was probably. Why he wasn't home yet, he didn't answer. Just sat there in the cemetery parking lot in January, his father's grave 20 yards away, and realized the pot roast had been a performance. The hand-holding in church had been a performance. All of it, every smile, every promise, every "I'll make this right," had been one long, calculated lie. Charles drove back to the Bluebird Diner. Amy was still there, sitting in the same booth, staring at her coffee cup like she could read the future in the bottom of it. He slid back into the seat across from her, put the folder down between them. "Walk me through it," he said. Amy's hands shook as she opened the folder. "I shouldn't have waited. I've been carrying this for 2 months, and every day I thought maybe it would just stop. Maybe she'd end it on her own, and I wouldn't have to hurt you." "Show me." Amy pulled out the highlighted pages. Her teacher's training showed she'd color-coded everything. Yellow for daytime messages, pink for nighttime, red for the really bad ones. "November 15th, Amy said, pointing to a date. "That's when I first suspected. I was driving home from parent-teacher conferences, went past the hospital around 10:30, saw Mom's car in the staff lot. Her shift had ended at 6. Charles nodded, didn't trust himself to speak. "I drove by again the next week. Same thing, her car, and a Tesla I didn't recognize." Amy looked up. "So I pulled the phone records. We're all on the same family plan. It's not like I had to hack anything." "The phone company just sent them." She pointed to the Tuesday pot roast night. 18 texts between 9 p.m. and midnight, while Charles had been sitting in the living room thinking they were trying. "This one," Amy tapped a message from Wednesday, "is when you told her about the lake cabin, right?" Charles looked at the timestamp, 7:43 p.m. Linda's message to Marcus. "He booked us a romantic getaway, so desperate, kind of pathetic." But Marcus's reply, "Let him play house. You know where you really belong." The diner smelled like bacon grease and burnt coffee. Someone's fork scraped against a plate. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Everything too bright, too loud, too real. "There's more," Amy said quietly. She pulled out another page. "From this morning, after you left the house." Linda to Marcus. "He's acting strange. I think he might know something." Marcus to Linda. "Does he have any proof? No? Then keep performing. Old men are easy to manipulate." Old men. Charles was 67. Not ancient, but not young. Not the kind of man a 43-year-old surgeon worried about. "I'm sorry," Amy whispered. "I should have told you the first week. I just kept hoping." "Don't." Charles reached across and squeezed her hand. "You were trying to protect me. I understand that. What are you going to do?" Charles closed the folder. Thought about the house he shared with Linda. 42 years of shared space. Shared routines. Shared lies, apparently. "I can't go back there," he said. "Not tonight. Stay with me." "No." He shook his head. "I'm going to Dad's place." Amy's eyes widened. "The Victorian house?" "Dad, no one's lived there since Grandpa died. It's freezing. There's no food, no—" "It's mine," Charles said. "And Linda's never set foot in it. That's enough." Saturday morning, Charles went back to the house while Linda was at work. He moved fast. Didn't want to be there when she got home. Packed one suitcase, clothes, toiletries, his father's photo from the dresser. Grabbed the boxes of estate papers from the garage, the ones Linda had helped him with, the ones he'd signed without really reading because he'd been too grief-fogged to care. Left his wedding ring on the dresser, wrote a note on the back of an envelope. "I know, don't call." He met him with her car, helped him load up. They drove in convoy to the Victorian house on the edge of town, the place where sidewalks ended and county roads began. The house was as cold as Amy had warned. Charles could see his breath inside. The floorboards creaked under his weight. His father's pipe tobacco smell still clung to the curtains, embedded deep after 40 years of evening smokes in the study. Charles stood in the front hallway and felt more alone than he'd ever felt in his life. His phone started ringing. "Linda." He counted 12 calls in the first hour, then the text started. "Where are you?" "Charles, please answer. We need to talk about this." "You're overreacting." He blocked her number. Monday morning, the certified letter arrived. Brennan and Associates, attorneys at law, Linda's lawyer. Charles opened it standing in his father's freezing kitchen, winter light coming through the wavy old glass windows. The letter was 2 pages of legal language, but the main points were clear enough. Linda claimed Charles had abandoned the marriage. She was seeking alimony. She wanted half of all community property, including business assets. Charles read that phrase 3 times. Business assets. What business assets? He'd been an electrician, sold the business when he retired 3 years ago. The money was mostly gone, used to pay off the house, cover his father's final medical bills, normal life expenses. What business could Linda possibly be talking about? He looked at the boxes he'd hauled from the garage. Eugene's estate papers, the ones Linda had organized for him, the ones she'd handed him to sign while he was still numb with grief, barely eating, barely functioning. Charles started opening boxes, found folders labeled things like Mercy General Hospital, Inc., and Board of Directors Annual Meeting Minutes and Shareholder Transfer Agreement. And pulled out a document dated 6 months ago, shortly after his father's death. Notice of estate transfer. Eugene Reed to Charles Eugene Reed, 68% controlling interest, Mercy General Hospital. Charles sat down hard on the kitchen floor. He owned the hospital. His father had left him the hospital, the same hospital where Linda worked, where she'd been conducting her affair in exam rooms and supply closets. And Linda had known. For 6 months, she'd known. The letter fell from his hands. A certified notice from an estate lawyer named Margaret Chin, addressed to Charles at this Victorian house, dated 6 months ago. He'd never seen it before. Linda must have intercepted it, handled everything herself, kept him in the dark on purpose while she voted his shares, made his decisions, ran his hospital as if it were hers. Charles looked at the legal document in his hands, then at the lawyer's letter demanding half his assets. For the first time since Marcus Webb had walked through his door, Charles Reed smiled. It wasn't a happy smile, but it was something. The days blurred together after that. Charles would wake up in his father's old bed, the mattress too soft, springs creaking every time he moved, and lie there staring at the ceiling plaster, counting cracks. The house settled around him, floor joists popping, radiators clanking to life with reluctant heat. He'd get up eventually, make coffee, stand at the kitchen window, looking out at the frozen yard where his father used to grow tomatoes every summer. The garden was just dead stalks now, poking up through crusted snow. Cereal for breakfast, cereal for lunch. Sometimes he'd heat up a can of soup for dinner, but mostly he just ate standing at the counter, staring at nothing. The estate papers were spread across the dining room table. He'd go through them methodically. Incorporation documents, shareholder certificates, board meeting minutes he should have attended, but Linda had gone to in his place. Her signature on proxy forms, her handwriting on notes in the margins, 68% ownership. The hospital his father had built with borrowed money in 1962, the place where working families went when they needed healing. All his now. And he hadn't even known. Some days he'd sit in his father's study, the one room in the house that still felt occupied. Eugene's reading glasses were still on the desk, next to a newspaper from November. The Hippocratic Oath hung on the wall in a cheap frame. Do no harm. Uphold ethical standards. And Charles would sit in his father's chair and wonder if Eugene was disappointed in him, for not knowing, for signing papers without reading them, for being so damn trusting. Wednesday afternoon, he forced himself out of the house. Needed a new furnace filter. The heating system was running but barely, and he couldn't afford to let it die completely. Frank Dooley's hardware store was warm and bright, too bright. Christmas lights were still up even though it was mid-January. Frank was behind the counter, and his face did that thing when Charles walked in. That flicker of recognition followed by careful neutrality. "Charles," Frank said, "how you been? Getting by?" Other customers in the store went quiet. Charles felt their eyes like weights. He found the furnace filter aisle, grabbed what he needed, heard two women whispering near the paint section. Heard she moved out. Oh. Well, these things happen. That doctor at the hospital. Charles paid fast. Frank rang him up without the usual small talk about weather or county politics. Just, that'll be $18.50, and careful eye contact that said, "I'm sorry this is happening to you, but I don't know what to say." Charles left without his change. The pharmacy was worse. He needed his blood pressure medication. Ironic, given that his blood pressure had probably skyrocketed in the last 2 weeks. The young clerk at the counter called his name. Then, "Oh, and Mrs. Reed's prescription is ready too if you want to pick it up." Linda's migraine medication. The pills she'd ask him to grab every month because the pharmacy was on his side of town. Her name was still Reed, still tied to his. "No thanks," Charles said. "She can get it herself." The clerk's face went pink. "Oh, sorry, I didn't. It's fine." But it wasn't fine. Nothing was fine. He drove back to the Victorian house and didn't leave again for 3 days. Sunday morning, he made himself go to church, couldn't hide forever, couldn't let Linda take his faith along with everything else. First Methodist was the same as always. Same organ prelude, same hymn board with the numbers changed out. Pastor Wilkins at the pulpit in his black robe. Charles slipped into a back pew, not his usual spot up front. The bench was empty around him. People gave him space, not cruel, just careful, like grief and humiliation might be contagious. The sermon was about stewardship, legacy, what it means to protect what's been entrusted to you. "Some of us inherit money," Pastor Wilkins said, his voice carrying through the sanctuary. "Some of us inherit land, some inherit businesses or family names, but all inheritance comes with responsibility. The question isn't what we've been given, it's what we do with it. Charles felt every word like a finger pointing directly at him. After the service, Pastor Wilkins caught him in the parking lot. "Charles, good to see you." "Pastor, how you holding up?" Charles shrugged, didn't trust himself to answer honestly. Wilkins put a hand on Charles's shoulder. "Your father built something important, that hospital. It mattered to this community, still does." "I know. He left it in your hands for a reason." Wilkins squeezed once, then let go. "Don't let him down." Charles drove back to the Victorian house, sat in the truck for 20 minutes before going inside. That evening, restless, he drove past the hospital. Didn't mean to. Just ended up there somehow, idling in the parking lot across the street. Linda's car was there, and next to it, a Tesla. Charles recognized it now. Marcus Webb's. They came out together. 5:30 on a Sunday. No shift ended at 5:30. They were laughing about something. Marcus's hand on Linda's back, easy and possessive. Linda leaning into him like she'd never leaned into Charles. They weren't hiding anymore. Why bother? Old men were easy to manipulate, after all. Charles drove home, sat in his father's study in the dark, stared at that Hippocratic oath on the wall until the words blurred. Do no harm, uphold ethical standards. Was he dishonoring his father by doing nothing? By letting Marcus and Linda corrupt the place Eugene had built? Or was he just being smart, protecting himself? 67 years old, too old to fight, too tired to care. Charles didn't know anymore. Tuesday evening, 9 o'clock, someone knocked on the door. Charles almost didn't answer. Could see through the window. It wasn't Amy, too tall. Could see it was a black man in a work uniform, thermos in one hand. He opened the door a crack. "Mr. Reed?" The man was older, 70s maybe, deep voice. "I'm Earl Patterson, work at Mercy General, night janitor. Been there since '93. Charles remembered him vaguely. Church fish fries. Little League game. Little League games when Amy was young. Earl had coached third base. "Your daddy was a good man to me," Earl said. "Wondered if I could talk to you for a minute." Charles opened the door wider. Earl came into the front hallway, snow on his boots, cold air following him in. He unscrewed the thermos and poured coffee into the lid, handed it to Charles. It smelled burnt and strong. "I know what's been happening," Earl said. "At the hospital, with your wife and Dr. Webb. And I got some things I think you should see." He pulled a worn spiral notebook from his jacket pocket, the kind with a marbled cover, bought at the dollar store. "Been keeping track," Earl said. "Not to be nosy, but because your daddy built that hospital on honest ground. Didn't sit right with me. What's been going on?" Earl opened the notebook. Pages and pages of dates, times, room numbers, handwriting shaky but determined. July 14th. Dr. Webb's vehicle in staff lot, 2 a.m. Exam room 3 light on until 3:15 a.m. August 2nd. Nurse Linda Reed clocked out at 6 p.m. Vehicle still in lot at 11 p.m. Seen leaving with Dr. Webb. On and on. Months of careful documentation. An old janitor bearing witness to corruption in the halls he mopped. Charles's hands shook holding the thermos lid. The coffee was terrible, burnt and bitter. He drank it anyway. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked. Earl looked him in the eye. "Because your daddy built something that mattered. Took care of people. Took care of my wife when our insurance lapsed. Treated her cancer for free. Made sure she died with dignity. I owe him. And I owe the place itself." He closed the notebook but left it on the hall table. "That hospital's yours now, Mr. Reed. Heard about the inheritance through the grapevine. Figured you didn't know, given how things have been going, but now you do know. Question is, what you gonna do about it?" Earl put his thermos back together, headed for the door, stopped with his hand on the knob. "Your daddy wouldn't have stood for this. Not in his hospital. Just thought you should know that." The door closed. Charles stood in the front hallway holding a cup of burnt coffee, staring at a janitor's notebook on his father's hall table. For the first time in 2 weeks, something that wasn't grief or rage moved through him. It felt like purpose. Wednesday morning, Charles went back to the garage. Not his garage. He still thought of the Victorian house as his father's place, even though Eugene had been dead 2 months and the deed was in Charles's name now. The boxes were stacked against the far wall, next to Eugene's old workbench. Charles had moved them here when he'd fled his shared house with Linda, but he hadn't really looked at them. Not systematically. He'd found the ownership transfer by accident, pulled it out, stared at it in shock. But there was more. He could feel it. He started with the box labeled Hospital Corporation Legal, incorporation papers from 1962, Eugene's signature in fountain pen ink, still dark after all these years. The hospital had started as a partnership, Eugene and 2 other doctors, but over time, Eugene had bought them out, kept control, wanted to make sure the mission stayed pure, serve working families with dignity and competence. Charles found shareholder meeting minutes, board elections, financial statements going back decades. And there, 6 months ago, the transfer documents. Estate of Eugene Michael Reed, deceased, hereby transfers all shares and voting rights to Charles Eugene Reed, son and sole heir, 68% controlling interest. The other 32% was split among various doctors and community members. But Charles had the power, had always had the power. He called Amy. "Did you know about this?" he asked when she answered. "The hospital?" "Know about what?" "Dad left me the hospital. I own it. Mom's been voting my shares for 6 months. Silence on the line. Then, "Dad, can I come over?" Amy arrived 40 minutes later with her laptop and a yellow legal pad. She sat at Eugene's dining table, surrounded by papers, and started taking notes like she was grading essays. "Okay," she said. "Walk me through what you found." Charles showed her everything. The transfer documents, the proxy forms with Linda's signature, the board meeting minutes, where decisions had been made in his name without his knowledge. Amy's fingers flew across her keyboard. Hospital bylaws, board authority, majority shareholder rights, and she looked up. "Dad, you can do basically anything. You can call special meetings, replace board members, revoke all proxy authorizations. You're not just an owner, you're the owner." Charles sat down heavily. The magnitude of it was overwhelming. "Why would Dad do this?" he asked. "I'm an electrician. I don't know anything about running a hospital." Amy reached across and squeezed his hand. "Maybe he thought you knew the most important thing. How to care about people." She pulled out another document. "Look at this. Letter from Grandpa. It's addressed to you." The envelope was marked, "For Charles, private," in Eugene's shaky handwriting. The letter inside was dated a week before Eugene's stroke. Charles's hands trembled as he unfolded it. "Son, if you're reading this, I'm gone. The hospital is yours now. Don't let anyone tell you you're not qualified to run it. I've watched doctors with fancy degrees forget why we do this work. But you've never forgotten what it means to serve. You rewired that hospital twice, kept the lights on, kept the heat running. You know its bones better than any administrator. Leadership isn't about medical degrees, it's about character. It's about caring more about people than profit. You have both. Protect what we built. Don't let it become just another corporate facility. Keep it honest. Keep it human. Love. Dad." Charles read it 3 times. Amy was crying quietly beside him. "He believed in you?" she whispered. Charles folded the letter carefully, put it back in the envelope, felt something shift inside him. Not confidence exactly, but something close to it. Resolve, maybe? Friday evening, Earl came back. Charles had been expecting him somehow, had left the porch light on. Earl brought a second notebook, this one focused on recent months. Supply orders, equipment requests, vendor relationships. "Been meaning to mention something," Earl said, sitting at the kitchen table. "Dr. Webb's been pushing hard for new equipment, real expensive cardiac imaging suite, $2.3 million. Charles nodded. "That sounds like hospital business." Except he picked the vendor himself, bypassed normal procurement, company called Meditech Solutions. Earl slid a printout across the table, something he'd looked up at the library computer. "Dr. Webb owns 15% stock in Meditech. Public records." Charles stared at the paper. "That's a conflict of interest," Earl finished. "Doctor profiting from equipment he's ordering. That ain't legal. And he's proposing this to the board? Next meeting, 2 weeks from Tuesday." Earl pulled out another sheet. "Here's the other thing. His proposal eliminates the night janitorial staff. Says it's cost savings. Hire cheaper contract workers instead. That's 7 full-time positions. Me and 6 others. Been working that hospital for decades." Charles felt cold anger settle into his bones. Not the hot rage of betrayal, something colder, cleaner. He wants to fire you to pay for equipment he profits from. That's about the size of it. Charles stood up, walked to his father's study, came back with a business card he'd found in the estate papers. Margaret Chen, Estate and Corporate Law. Her office was in the county seat. "Earl, would you be willing to present this to the board, your documentation?" Earl didn't hesitate. "If it helps protect what your daddy built, yes, sir." "Then I need to talk to a lawyer," Charles said. "Not about divorce, about hospital governance." He looked at Earl's notebooks, at his father's letter, at the ownership documents spread across the table. Linda hadn't just betrayed their marriage. She'd betrayed her fiduciary duty, had used Charles's grief to control his inheritance, had let Marcus Webb corrupt the institution Eugene Reed had built with honest intention. And Marcus, arrogant, entitled Marcus, was about to fire working people like Earl to line his own pockets. Charles had been half dead. Linda was right about that. Half dead with grief and routine and the slow erosion of meaning. But standing in his father's kitchen with Earl Patterson's evidence in his hands, Charles Reed felt something wake up inside him. Not quite alive yet, but getting there. Monday morning, Charles drove to the county seat. Margaret Chin's office was on the second floor of an old brick building downtown, above an insurance agency. The stairwell smelled like coffee and copy paper. Margaret was younger than he expected, maybe late 50s, Vietnamese or Chinese. Charles couldn't tell. She had her parents' photo on the desk. An older couple, father in a work uniform, mother with kind eyes. "Mr. Reed," she said, shaking his hand. Firm grip, no pity in her eyes. "I handled your father's estate. I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances." Charles sat down in the leather chair across from her desk, pulled out the proxy forms Linda had signed. "My wife has been voting my shares at hospital board meetings. I never authorized that." Margaret took the forms, studied them. Her expression didn't change, but something went cold behind her eyes. "These signatures don't match," she said. "I have your signature on file from the estate documents. This isn't you." "Can she do that? Just forge my signature?" "Absolutely not. This is fraud, Mr. Reed. You could press criminal charges if you wanted to." Charles shook his head. "I don't want her in jail. I want her out of my hospital." Margaret nodded slowly. "As majority owner, you can revoke all proxy authorizations. You can attend board meetings yourself. You can replace board members if needed. The bylaws are clear. 68% gives you significant authority." She pulled up a file on her computer. "There's also the matter of Dr. Marcus Webb's equipment proposal. If he has financial interest in the vendor, that's conflict of interest under both hospital ethics codes and state medical law. The medical board would be very interested in that." Charles felt something settle in his chest. Not satisfaction exactly, just clarity. "What do I need to do?" Margaret leaned back in her chair. "The board meets in 10 days. You should attend, present the evidence, let them vote." She paused. "But I have to ask, why are you doing this? Is it revenge?" Charles thought about his father's letter, about Earl mopping floors for 31 years, about working families who came to that hospital because they trusted the Reed name. "My father built something that mattered," he said. "I need to protect it." Margaret smiled for the first time. "That's the right reason, Mr. Reed. Your father would be proud." Wednesday afternoon, Charles went to the hospital. First time since he'd moved out. He needed to pick up his father's personal effects from storage. A box the administrator had called about, stuff from Eugene's old office. He was walking down the main corridor when he saw Marcus Webb. White coat, stethoscope, confident stride. Marcus recognized him, stopped. "Charles," Marcus said, something like sympathy in his voice. Performed sympathy. "Heard you and Linda are having troubles. That's rough, man." Charles just looked at him. "But hey," Marcus continued, "sometimes people grow apart. Nothing wrong with that. Better to be honest, right?" The arrogance was breathtaking. Standing in the hallway of Charles's hospital, having screwed Charles's wife in exam rooms, Earl documented, and offering relationship advice. "Hospital's doing well, though," Marcus said, like they were colleagues, like they were friends. "I'm securing funding for a new cardiac imaging suite, cutting-edge equipment, going to put us on the map." "That right?" Charles kept his voice flat. "Yeah. Board votes next week. Finally getting rid of some dead weight around here. Streamlining operations. Night janitorial staff. Unnecessary expense? We can contract that out for half the cost." Dead weight. Earl Patterson, who'd worked there 31 years. Dead weight. "Sounds efficient," Charles said. Marcus's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, probably Linda, and smiled. "Anyway, good seeing you. Take care of yourself." He walked away down the corridor, expensive shoes clicking on the tile, not a care in the world. Charles stood there for a long moment, watched Marcus turn the corner, disappear toward the cardiac wing, the surgery wing his father had added in 1980. The wing Charles had rewired when the old circuits couldn't handle the new equipment load. "You think I'm irrelevant," Charles thought. "You think I'm defeated. You're about to learn otherwise." Thursday evening, Charles drove to First Methodist. Found Pastor Wilkins in his office working on Sunday's sermon. "Charles," Wilkins said, gesturing to the chair. "What's on your mind?" Charles sat, clasped his hands together. "Pastor, I need to ask you something about forgiveness." He explained the situation, not every detail, but enough. The betrayal, the hospital ownership, the upcoming decision about whether to fight back or walk away. The Christian thing is to turn the other cheek, right? Just let it go? Wilkins leaned back in his chair. Jesus turned the other cheek when struck. He didn't turn the other cheek when he saw money changers corrupting the temple. He made a whip and drove them out. Charles blinked. "Forgiveness means releasing hatred from your heart," Wilkins continued. "It doesn't mean tolerating ongoing harm. Your father's hospital is a trust, a stewardship. God gave you responsibility for it. Letting corruption continue isn't holy, Charles. It's cowardice. So fighting back doesn't make me unchristian? Fighting back with truth and justice? That's exactly Christian. Seeking revenge with cruelty? That's sin. Know the difference. Charles felt something loosen in his chest. Permission, validation. Your father built that hospital to serve people, Wilkins said. Honor that, protect that. Do it with integrity, and you'll have nothing to answer for. Charles was walking to his truck when Amy called. Dad, Mom's lawyer sent another letter. Amy's voice was tight. She's demanding half the hospital value in the divorce settlement. Claims community property. Charles unlocked his truck, sat behind the wheel, didn't start the engine. Let her try, he said. What? She has no idea what's about to happen, Amy. None of them do. What are you going to do? Charles looked at the church steeple against the darkening sky. I'm going to that board meeting, and I'm going to tell the truth. Do you need help? Yeah, Charles said. I do. The dining room table in the Victorian house became command central. Charles spread out everything. Earl's notebooks, Margaret's legal briefs, hospital bylaws, board composition charts. Amy came over after school most days, laptop open, yellow legal pad filling with notes. Okay, she said Friday evening, a week before the board meeting. Hospital Ethics Code, Section 12. Board members and senior staff must disclose any financial interest in vendors, contractors, or service providers. Failure to disclose constitutes grounds for disciplinary action up to and including termination. Charles highlighted the passage. Marcus never disclosed his stock ownership, not according to the meeting minutes. Amy clicked through files. He presented Meditech Solutions as an independent recommendation, said they had the best equipment at competitive prices. Never mentioned he owns 15% of the company. Charles made a note on his timeline. The evidence was building, not just an affair, institutional corruption. They worked in comfortable silence for a while. The radiators clanked. Outside, February wind rattled the windows. Charles made coffee. The good stuff now, not instant. Amy had brought groceries earlier in the week. Started stocking his kitchen like he was one of her students who needed looking after. What about the night janitorial staff? Charles asked. The 7 positions Marcus wants to eliminate? Amy pulled up a spreadsheet. I called HR, said I was doing research for a community college project. They gave me the numbers. Combined, those 7 workers have 143 years of service. Earl's been their longest, 31 years. The youngest has been there 8. And Marcus wants to fire them to pay for equipment he profits from. Exactly. Amy looked up. Dad, this isn't just about Mom anymore. This is about protecting people. People like Earl. People Grandpa would have protected. Charles nodded. She was right. Somewhere along the way, this had stopped being about his wounded pride and Linda's betrayal. It had become about something larger. Monday, 9 days before the board meeting, Margaret called. I've prepared a presentation outline for you, she said. 10 slides. Establishes your identity, presents the evidence, proposes board action. Keep it factual, not emotional. I'm not good at public speaking. You don't need to be eloquent, you need to be truthful. Big difference. She paused. Charles, they're going to be shocked when you walk in. Linda's been representing you for 6 months. They think they know you through her. Good, Charles said. Let them be shocked. Wednesday evening, Charles practiced his introduction, stood in his father's study, looking at his own reflection in the dark window. I'm Charles Reed, majority shareholder. Eugene Reed's son, too aggressive. He tried again. My name is Charles Reed. I own this hospital. Too entitled, once more. I'm Charles Reed. My father founded this hospital in 1962. He left it in my care. I'm here to exercise my responsibilities as majority owner. Better, factual, calm. Amy was sitting in Eugene's chair, timing him. 3 minutes, 40 seconds. Margaret said to keep it under 5. You're good. They went through the evidence presentation, Earl's documentation, the conflict of interest proof, the medical board statutes. Charles's hands shook the first few run-throughs, but by the 10th time, his voice was steady. You've got this, Amy said. But Dad, what if Mom tries to fight you, publicly? Charles had thought about that. Linda would be there, staff representative. She'd have to watch him dismantle everything she'd built with Marcus. Then she'll lose publicly, he said. The night before the board meeting, Charles couldn't sleep. He sat in his father's study at 2 a.m, Eugene's reading glasses on the desk, the Hippocratic Oath on the wall. He pulled out his father's letter again. Read it in the circle of lamplight. Leadership isn't about medical degrees. It's about character. Charles had spent his whole life feeling less than. His father was Dr. Eugene Reed, founder of Mercy General Hospital. Charles was an electrician, worked with his hands, fix things when they broke. But sitting there in the cold February darkness, Charles realized something. He'd rewired that hospital twice. Knew every circuit, every junction box, every panel. Had kept the lights on literally when the storm of '98 knocked out power for 3 days. Had crawled through crawl spaces and climbed into ceilings to make sure patients stayed safe and warm. Maybe that counted for something. Maybe knowing the bones of a place, caring about its mission, protecting the people inside it. Maybe that was leadership too. He picked up his father's reading glasses, put them on. They were slightly too strong for his eyes, but through them, his notes came into sharper focus. Symbolic, he thought, seeing through his father's eyes now. His phone buzzed. Amy, texting at 2 in the morning. Dad, I love you. I'm proud of you. Grandpa would be too. Charles texted back. Hope so, honey. I really hope so. Tuesday morning, board meeting day. Charles woke at 6, showered, dressed carefully. Clean work shirt, the good one, pressed, his father's old blazer. It fit perfectly, like Eugene had been saving it for him all along. Work boots, not dress shoes. He was who he was. Breakfast was black coffee and toast. Couldn't eat much. Nerves fluttering in his stomach like birds trying to get out. Amy arrived at 8 with a briefcase. For your documents. Looks professional. They loaded everything. Presentation printouts, Earl's notebooks, Margaret's legal opinions, the hospital bylaws with sections highlighted. You ready? Amy asked. No, Charles said honestly. But I'm going anyway. They drove separately. Charles wanted his own vehicle. Didn't want to depend on anyone else for the exit. The hospital was 20 minutes away. He took his time, watched the town roll past. The diner where Amy had shown him the cell phone records. The church where he and Linda had sat holding hands, performing reconciliation. The hardware store where Frank Dooley had given him that careful, pitying look. Small towns have long memories. Today would give them something new to remember. Charles pulled into the hospital parking lot at 9:45. The board meeting started at 10. He watched other members arrive. Older professionals in expensive cars. Linda in her scrubs, she must be working a shift before the meeting. And Marcus in his Tesla, confident swagger as he walked toward the entrance. Charles sat in his truck. Breathing, reviewing his notes one last time, his phone buzzed. Amy, you're a Reed, act like it. Charles looked at the hospital entrance. The sign above the door, Mercy General Hospital, founded 1962. Eugene Reed, MD, his father's name, his father's vision, his father's trust. Time to protect what you built, Dad. Charles grabbed the briefcase, got out of the truck. The February air was cold, but not as bitter as it had been. Spring was coming eventually, always did. He walked through the parking lot. Past Marcus's Tesla, past Linda's car with the nursing school parking sticker, past the maintenance entrance where Earl would be coming in for his night shift in a few hours. Pushed through the main doors, followed the signs to the administrative wing, boardroom, straight ahead. Helen Cartwright, the board president, was already calling the meeting to order. Charles slipped into a back row seat. Nobody noticed him. Just an old man in a work jacket, probably waiting for someone. Marcus was at the front, setting up his presentation, confident, prepared, no idea what was coming. Linda sat at the conference table, staff representative, her back to Charles. He could see her shoulders, the way she held herself. Familiar after 42 years, foreign now. Helen went through routine business, budget updates, staffing reports, compliance reviews. Then, Agenda Item 4, Capital Equipment Proposal, Dr. Webb. Marcus stood, clicked to his first slide. Thank you, Madam President. I'm excited to present our new cardiac imaging suite proposal. Charles listened, watched Marcus sell his vision. $2.3 million, state-of-the-art equipment, put Mercy General on the map. A board member asked, how do we fund this? Marcus clicked to his next slide. Operational efficiency. We eliminate night janitorial services, contract those out, 7 positions, significant salary savings, dead weight, just like he'd said in the hallway. Earl and his colleagues were dead weight to be discarded. The board members nodded, made notes, seemed favorable. Helen Cartwright, any objections before we vote? Silence. Charles stood up in the back row. Every head turned. I have an objection, he said. Helen squinted. And you are? Charles walked to the front of the room, set his briefcase on the table, looked at Linda, her face draining white, looked at Marcus, his confident smile faltering. I'm Charles Reed, he said, Eugene Reed's son, majority shareholder. I own this hospital. The room went completely silent. Charles opened his briefcase. And we need to talk about what's been happening here. Helen Cartwright recovered first, and Reed, we've been operating under your wife's proxy authorization for forged proxy, Charles said, pulling out Margaret's legal opinion. I never authorized her to vote on my behalf. My attorney has confirmed the signatures don't match. He handed the document to Helen. She studied it, her face going carefully neutral. Margaret Chen stepped into the room. She'd been waiting in the hallway. Margaret Chin, estate and corporate counsel for Mr. Reed. Everything in that brief is accurate. Mrs. Reed has been fraudulently representing Mr. Reed's interests for 6 months. Linda's face was pale as chalk. She started to speak, but Charles held up his hand. I'm not here about forgery, he said. That's a separate matter. I'm here about Dr. Webb's proposal. He clicked to his first slide. The boardroom projector hummed to life. Webb is proposing we purchase equipment from Meditech Solutions. $2.3 million. Charles clicked again. Public business records show Dr. Webb owns 15% stock in Meditech Solutions. He has direct financial interest in this vendor. The room went silent. Charles could hear the projector fan, the rustle of papers as board members shifted. Marcus stood abruptly. This is a personal vendetta. Because of my relationship with Linda. No, Dr. Webb. Charles's voice was steady, calm. This is about institutional ethics. Your personal life is between you and your wife. Your professional conduct is board business. And he pulled out Earl's notebooks. Earl Patterson is our night janitor, 31 years of service. He's been documenting irregularities for 6 months. Equipment orders placed through Meditech without competitive bidding. Late-night access to exam rooms. Supply discrepancies. Charles handed the notebooks to Helen. She paged through them, her expression hardening. Miss Patterson doesn't just keep the floors clean, Charles continued. He keeps institutional memory. He remembers what this hospital is supposed to be. A board member, older man, doctor, somebody, Charles hadn't caught the name, spoke up. Are you saying Dr. Webb's proposal involves conflict of interest? I'm saying Dr. Webb never disclosed his financial relationship with the vendor. That's a violation of Hospital Ethics Code. Section 12. It's also a violation of state medical law. Charles nodded to Margaret. My attorney can provide the statute references. Margaret did, handing out copies. The board members read in silence. Marcus's face had gone red. This is ridiculous. The equipment is top quality. The pricing is competitive. My stock ownership is irrelevant. Then why didn't you disclose it? Charles asked. If it's irrelevant, why hide it? Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Linda like she might help him. Linda was staring at the table. Charles clicked to his next slide. There's also the matter of the 7 positions Dr. Webb proposes eliminating. Night janitorial staff. Combined experience. 143 years. Loyal employees. People my father trusted. People this community needs. He looked directly at Marcus. You called them dead weight. In the hallway last week, you told me they were unnecessary expense. But they're not dead weight, Dr. Webb. They're the foundation. They're the people who keep this place running when nobody's watching. The boardroom was stifling, overheated. Charles could smell Linda's perfume from across the table. Chanel No. 5, the same scent for 42 years. Could see Marcus's Rolex catching the fluorescent light. Could hear his own heartbeat pounding. But his voice stayed level. My father built this hospital to serve working families with integrity. That was his mission in 1962. That's still our mission today. This proposal violates both principles. Helen Cartwright looked around the table. Board members, we need to vote. First on Dr. Webb's equipment proposal as presented. Hands went up, all opposed, unanimous rejection. Second, on launching an ethics review of Dr. Webb's vendor relationships and potential conflicts of interest. Again, unanimous approval. Marcus stood so fast his chair scraped back. This is a joke. I don't have to sit here and... No, you don't, Charles said quietly. But the state medical board will want to talk to you. They take conflict of interest very seriously. Marcus grabbed his briefcase, pulled out his phone, already dialing, stormed toward the door without another word. Charles heard him in the hallway. I need to talk to legal. Now. Linda rose too, slowly. She wouldn't look at Charles, just gathered her papers with shaking hands. Linda, Helen said, as staff representative, do you have any comment? Linda's voice came out barely above a whisper. I resign my position, effective immediately. She walked toward the door. Her heels clicked on the tile, the same sound from 42 years of walking beside him. The sound of their life together. At the doorway, she paused, turned back. Charles, we're done, he said. Not cruel, just final. You chose this. Live with it. Linda left. The clicking faded down the hallway. After the room emptied, Helen Cartwright approached Charles. Mr. Reed, I apologize. We should have been notified directly about your father's will. We didn't know. My wife made sure of that. Moving forward, you have a seat on this board, and a voice in all major decisions. Helen held out her hand. Your father built something important. I'm glad you're here to protect it. Charles shook her hand. The other board members came forward too, introduced themselves properly. Dr. Harrison, Mrs. Kowalski, Mr. Trent, people he'd seen around town for years but never really known. They respected him now, not because of his father's name, because of what he'd done in this room. how he'd done it. The door opened again. Earl Patterson, still in his work uniform, thermos under his arm. He must have heard somehow. Small-town grapevine. "Mr. Reed," Earl said. "Heard about the vote." Charles crossed the room, shook Earl's hand. "You saved this place, Earl. That notebook of yours." No, sir." Earl's grip was strong, calloused from decades of mop handles and floor buffers. "You did. I just kept notes." After everyone left, Charles sat alone in the boardroom. Looked at his father's portrait on the wall. He hadn't noticed it before. Young Eugene, in his white coat, stethoscope around his neck, that serious expression he always wore in photos. Charles's phone buzzed. Text from Linda. "I'm sorry for everything." He looked at it for a long moment, then deleted it. Didn't respond. Sorry wasn't enough. Sorry didn't undo 6 months of lies. Didn't erase Marcus's hand on her shoulder, or the 11 p.m. text messages, or the playing the grieving wife perfectly comment. Sorry was just a word. Charles packed up his briefcase, walked through the hospital hallways, saw Earl mopping the cardiac wing floor, steady rhythm, same work he'd been doing for 31 years. Earl looked up, gave a small wave. Charles waved back. This is what matters, he thought. Not revenge. Not destroying Marcus or humiliating Linda. Just protecting what needs protecting. Just standing up when standing matters. He walked out into the February afternoon. The sun was actually shining for once, snow melting in the parking lot, water running in small streams toward the storm drains, winter breaking. Finally, 6 weeks later, the sign went up, Reed Memorial Hospital. Charles stood in the parking lot on a late March morning, watching the facility's crew bolt the new letters into place. The old Mercy General sign had served its purpose for 63 years. But the board had voted unanimously. Time to honor the founder properly. Helen Cartwright came out to stand beside him. Your father would be proud. I hope so. The scholarship fund, too. That was a good idea. The Eugene Reed Scholarship for nursing students. For working-class kids from the county who wanted to serve but couldn't afford the tuition. The board had approved it at their March meeting. 17 applications already. High school seniors with straight B averages and hearts for service. Charles had read every application himself, cried over a few of them. Kids who reminded him of what his father had believed in, that competence and compassion mattered more than money. Linda moved, I heard, Helen said carefully. Ohio, her sister's place. And Charles had gotten the divorce papers 2 weeks after the board meeting. Linda hadn't fought, hadn't asked for the hospital, just signed and left. Heard she got a nursing job at a clinic in Toledo. And Dr. Webb? Position in Arizona. Left before the state medical board could complete their investigation. Charles shrugged. Some people land on their feet no matter what. Helen nodded. They both knew Marcus would probably do fine. Find another hospital, maybe disclose his conflicts of interest this time, maybe not. The world wasn't always just, but Marcus wasn't Charles's problem anymore, wasn't in his hospital, wasn't corrupting what Eugene had built. That was enough. Sunday afternoon, Charles's kitchen smelled like tomatoes and garlic. Amy's lasagna, her grandmother's recipe, passed down from Charles's first wife. The one who died of cancer when Amy was 5. The one Charles had loved purely, before grief and loneliness had led him to Linda's safe steadiness. He'd lived alone since February, 7 weeks now. The Victorian house didn't feel lonely anymore, just quiet, and there was a difference. The doorbell rang. Amy let herself in. She had a key now, carrying a salad bowl and a bottle of wine. Pastor Wilkins is parking, she said. Mrs. Wilkins rode with me, and Frank Dooley said he'd be here by 4. Sunday dinners had become a regular thing. Not planned, exactly, just evolved. People Charles had known for years but never really connected with. Now they gathered around his father's old dining table and talked about normal things, town politics, spring planting, whether the high school football team would be any good this fall. Pastor Wilkins and his wife came in, bringing rolls from the bakery. Frank Dooley arrived last, with a pie from the diner, banana cream, Charles's favorite. They said grace. Wilkins kept it simple. For food and fellowship and the blessing of new beginnings. The lasagna was perfect. Amy had gotten the proportions exactly right. The conversation flowed easy, Frank telling a story about a customer who'd tried to return a hammer after 10 years, claiming it was defective. Mrs. Wilkins talking about the church Easter pageant, how the kid playing Jesus had stage fright. Normal, human, real. Charles contributed his own story about a hospital board meeting where Dr. Harrison had accidentally called someone by the wrong name for 20 minutes, and nobody corrected him. They all laughed. After dinner, they had coffee on the porch. The evening was warm enough, finally. Not quite spring yet, but close. The birds were coming back. Charles could hear them in the trees around the property. Someone was asking about you, Mrs. Wilkins said to Charles. Casual. Too casual. Oh? Betty Holbrook, from the church auxiliary. She's widowed too, few years back. Charles sipped his coffee. That right. Amy shot him a look, half amused, half hopeful. Just thought I'd mention it, Mrs. Wilkins said. She makes excellent pie, brings it to potlucks. I like pie, Charles said neutrally. Everyone laughed. The conversation moved on. But Charles noticed Amy smiling into her coffee cup. He wasn't ready, didn't know if he ever would be. But he also didn't close the door completely. Someday, maybe. When the wound wasn't so fresh. For now, this was enough. Coffee with friends, laughter that wasn't forced. Dinners where he wasn't performing or being performed for after everyone left. Amy helped him clean up. They worked in companionable silence, washing dishes, putting away leftovers. You doing okay, Dad? She asked. Yeah, Charles said. Meant it too. I really am. Amy kissed his cheek. Love you. See you Thursday? Board meeting? I'll be there. She left. Charles stood alone in his kitchen, Eugene's kitchen, and felt something he hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not happiness exactly. The wound was still there. 42 years don't disappear just because you file paperwork and change the locks. He still woke up sometimes reaching for Linda's side of the bed, still caught himself buying her favorite cereal at the grocery store. But the sharp edge of it was dulling, becoming something he could live with, carry, integrate. He'd survived, more than survived. He'd protected something that mattered, found purpose beyond his own pain. That counted for something. Tuesday morning, Charles walked the hospital grounds before the weekly management meeting. A habit now. He liked seeing the place wake up, maintenance crews arriving, nurses changing shifts, the first patients of the day being helped from cars by family members. The snow was completely gone, grass turning green in patches, flower beds beginning to show signs of life, tulips pushing through the mulch, daffodils already blooming along the south wall. He passed the maintenance entrance, saw the new hire, younger guy, maybe 40, who'd replaced one of the retiring janitors. The kid nodded respectfully. Morning, Mr. Reed. Morning. Earl was there too, checking the schedule board. Saw Charles and walked over. How's the new scholarship student working out? Earl asked. Jessica, she's great, smart, works hard. Reminds me of my daughter at that age. Your daddy would have liked that. Helping kids get their start. Charles nodded. They stood together in easy silence, watching the hospital come to life. You ever regret it? Earl asked. Stepping up like you did? Could have just walked away, sold the place. None of this would be your problem. Charles thought about it. About Linda and Marcus, gone now to other states, other lives. About the board meetings and budget reviews and personnel decisions he never asked for. About being responsible for 140 employees and a mission he didn't create. No, he said. I don't regret it. Earl nodded, headed back to his work. Charles walked to the main entrance. Stopped at the dedication plaque someone had added below the new sign. Reed Memorial Hospital, founded 1962, by Eugene Reed, M.D., rededicated, 2025, serving working families with integrity and compassion. He touched the bronze lettering, thought about his father. About 6 months ago, when Eugene had died and Charles had felt purposeless, adrift, half dead, like Linda said, he didn't feel half dead anymore. Inside the lobby, a young nursing student was helping an elderly woman with directions. The student, scholarship recipient, name tag said Jessica Martinez, was patient and kind. Took the time to walk the woman to radiology herself, rather than just pointing. Can I help you, Mr. Reed? Jessica asked when she came back. No, Charles said. Just checking in. How's your first month going? Her whole face lit up. It's amazing. I still can't believe I'm here. That scholarship, it changed my life, Mr. Reed. Changed everything. Your hard work did that, Charles said. We just opened the door. He headed to his meeting. Eugene's old office, now his, had a window overlooking the parking lot. He could see his truck. Linda's old parking spot, now occupied by someone else's car. The world kept turning. People came and went. Hearts broke and healed and broke again. But some things endured. Integrity, purpose, the quiet satisfaction of protecting what mattered. Charles sat at his father's desk. Opened the folder for today's meeting. Quality improvement metrics, patient satisfaction scores, budget variances, normal work, important work. His phone buzzed. Margaret Chen, texting about foundation paperwork for the scholarship fund. He typed back. How many more students can we fund next year? Her response? With current interest rates? Maybe 4, 5 if we're careful. Charles smiled, wrote back, let's plan for 5. He set down his phone, looked at his father's photo on the desk. Eugene, in his white coat, serious expression, everything ahead of him. We're doing okay, Dad, Charles said quietly to the empty office. Not perfect, but okay. Outside, spring was arriving, slow but certain, the way it always did. And inside the hospital his father built, Lights stayed on, patients got cared for, working families found healing. The mission continued. That was enough. Charles stood on the hospital steps late that afternoon, watching the sun drop toward the horizon. Golden light, not harsh. The kind that made even the parking lot asphalt look better than it was. He thought about where he'd been 6 months ago, folding Linda's scrubs in a warm living room, believing he knew his life. Believing 42 years meant something permanent. Turns out nothing's permanent except the choices you make when everything falls apart. You can't control who betrays you, can't control who walks away or who lies or who decides you're not enough anymore. Charles had learned that the hard way. But standing here now, watching the evening shift arrive and the day shift head home, he understood something his father probably knew all along. You can control what you build afterward. Not through revenge, not through bitterness, just through showing up, doing the work, protecting what needs protecting, standing for something when it would be easier to walk away. Dignity doesn't come from being loved by the right person. It comes from being the right kind of person when love fails you. A car pulled up, elderly couple, the man helping his wife out carefully. She was using a walker, moving slow, the man's hand on her elbow, patient and steady. Probably been married 50 years. The kind of partnership Charles had thought he had. He felt a pang, not jealousy exactly, just awareness of what he'd lost, but also awareness of what he'd gained. Purpose, self-respect. The knowledge that he could stand when it mattered. Charles walked to his truck, drove past fields turning green after the longest winter, past the house he'd shared with Linda. Someone else's curtains in the windows now. Felt nothing. Not anger, not longing, just the quiet acceptance of a closed chapter. Arrived home as dusk settled. His home now, not his father's. The Victorian house with its creaky floors and cold drafts and the smell of pipe tobacco embedded in the walls. But also, Amy's leftovers in the fridge, friends who called to check in, work that mattered, a scholarship fund that would help kids long after Charles was gone. He sat on the porch steps with his evening coffee, steam rising in the cooling air, listened to the birds settling for the night, watched the first stars appear, thought about his father's letter, leadership as character, thought about Earl's loyalty, Margaret's fierce advocacy, Amy's partnership, thought about Linda and Marcus wherever they were now, hoped they found what they were looking for, doubted they would. Some people spend their whole lives running from themselves. Charles had stopped running, 67 years old, alone but not lonely, wounded but healing, starting over but not from nothing, from something solid, from integrity, from choices made, right when everything was wrong. He finished his coffee, went inside to warmth and quiet. Tomorrow there'd be another board meeting, more decisions, more responsibility. But tonight, there was just this. A man at peace with the life he'd chosen, after the life he'd planned fell apart. Charles closed the door, heard it latch solid. Some stories end, new ones begin. That's just life. And life, the real kind, built on truth instead of performance, was enough.